Large majority of gains that you're going to find will be earned in the full stretch position. Okay, what we want to avoid is thinking about going heavier because you're trying to get bigger, but then you start doing this because it's too heavy, and you stop here, and you start doing this, right? But you think because you're going heavier with the weights, it's going to help you get bigger. False. Okay, this is where, again, hypertrophy is going to be found in the full range of motion, but also in creating time under tension. You know, your range of motion down pat, time under tension, sweet, your volume intensity, cool beans, man. But let's say your recovery sucks. That could really be stunting your growth. That could really be stopping you from progressing. You're best off doing the absolute smallest amount possible for the maximum return, because the moment you start doing more, if that return starts to drop, it's not really any longer worth it, is it? In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how you can maximize hypertrophy with your training, especially in comparison to training for strength. But I also want to show you how both of these things can and should fit into your training to ensure you're maximizing your gains. Now, in the video, I'm going to be covering range of motion, time under tension, volume/intensity, and recovery. Hope you enjoy this. Let's get it. Firstly, we're going to talk about range of motion. Now, I imagine that most of you here are probably interested in both getting stronger and bigger, which is essentially what this video is about, what this channel is about. Now, I'm going to use the bench press as our example just for now, okay? I'm going to talk about this. When it comes to strength training, we'll use strength training first. Now, what we're trying to avoid here on the bench press, if we're thinking about moving a maximal load, is not using a full range of motion, okay? The idea of some of the techniques that we're using is actually to decrease the range of motion in order to leverage more weight, okay? To put ourselves in a position to move more weight. Now, that isn't ideal for hypertrophy, okay? Now, with hypertrophy, when it comes to gaining muscle, you're going to find that most of the gains are going to be found in a full stretch position. So let's imagine we're bench pressing, okay? Full stretch position would be down here, okay? Getting that barbell down as low as we can. But because on the bench press with strength training, we're trying to arch, we're getting the scapular retraction and depression, pushing the rib cage up, we're reducing that range of motion. Okay, so we're not getting that full stretch position. So that's not going to really allow us to grow. Now, it's also important to remember that if we want to get stronger on the bench press, we need to grow still. Okay, so how would we do that? Now, I wouldn't use the bench press as a movement where I'm going to use it for hypertrophy. Now, I'm not saying you can't. There's a lot of bodybuilders who still bench press. Okay, now, typically, yes, of course, there are some that still bench big weights, but they would still be using some sort of a powerlifting technique, okay? But in general, most bodybuilders who do bench press, they use a completely different technique and they use much lighter weights because it's not safe to press heavy weights without that scapular retraction and depression, okay? It's not safe to take the shoulder joint through that full range under load like that on the bench press. So that's why they would do it. Now, if you're really trying to, think about hypertrophy for the chest, for the bench press muscles, now it's important to think about what we're doing after the bench press. This is, to me, right, our strength work. This is our strength work. Hypertrophy work can be done afterwards, right? We do accessories like dumbbell pressing. We may have options like machine presses. We may have flies. There's a whole bunch of different things that we can do for our chest where we can really target hypertrophy and range of motion. Okay, so what I want to quickly do is give you a little demonstration of a dumbbell press. We're going to use an incline dumbbell press. I'm going to show you what that full stretch, that full range looks like in comparison to something that's perhaps not a full range and the difference. Okay, so we'll jump on the bench here. I haven't really done any warm-up, so nice and light. So keeping in mind that the absolute large majority of gains that you're going to find will be earned in the full stretch position. Okay, which is right here. This is why when I'm doing dumbbell pressing, I talk about bringing the dumbbell head down to touch the shoulder. That is as far as I can possibly bring it down. Okay, so that's full stretch, full press. Now, we don't have to think about touching it together. That's not doing much at all. Elbows are locked. and then we're bringing it back down to the full stretch position, okay? This is the full range of motion for repressing movement. Okay, what we want to avoid is thinking about going heavier because you're trying to get bigger, but then you start doing this because it's too heavy, and you stop here, and you start doing this, right? But you think, because you're going heavier with the weights, it's going to help you get bigger. False. Hypertrophy is found in this range here, the large majority, okay? So, if you want to get bigger, think about what you're actually trying to achieve with your set. When you're doing a bench press set, if you're a powerlifter, if you're a strength athlete, you're trying to get a bigger bench press. You're not trying to increase the range of motion. That's not the goal. But if you're doing your accessory movements afterwards, perhaps that's your goal. That's a great idea, because to get ultimately strong, we should be trying to get bigger. That's when you can utilize the full range of motion, the full stretch, whether it's a dumbbell, whether it's a machine, whether you're doing a fly. Okay, but we're using a much lighter weight. It's much safer. There's a much less chance of injury. And that's one of the biggest things as well when it comes to getting big, avoiding injury. Okay, so they're kind of the differences when it comes to strength training and hypertrophy when it comes to the range of motion and how that can differ with, the movements, right? The bench press, not the best movement for hypertrophy, but that's not why we do it. Okay, yes, you will get bigger, of course, right? If you're getting stronger, you're eating, and you're bench pressing heavy, you're going to get bigger, but it's not optimal for hypertrophy. A full range of motion is optimal. Hope that makes sense. Like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe. All right, gang, next up, we're talking about time under tension. Now, time under tension is obviously very important when it comes to hypertrophy, but it's also important to, again, understand that a focus on time under tension, if you're training for strength, isn't going to be ideal, okay, where it is absolutely ideal for growing muscle. So there's a big difference in how we train there. Now, we'll use, let's say, a squat. We'll use a leg exercise, for example, for this one. Now, if you're training for strength, right, well, you need to think about preserving energy for the actual part of the squat where it's meant to be the most difficult, meaning standing up out of the hole, okay? If we go too slow on the way down, meaning we spend too much time under tension, we're actually fatiguing ourselves and we're going to lose the ability to stand up with the maximal load, okay? So there's definitely a trade-off there. So again, if you're looking to build size, yes, you can do squats, and things like tempo squats and pause squats are actually really good for hypertrophy. But there's also a lot of other things that we can do that are maybe a little bit, I would say, more efficient when it comes to hypertrophy, purely for the fact that they're less expensive and they're less taxing as well. So that we don't have to do too much squatting, because again, if you're focused on both strength and size, we want to be able to focus on squatting for strength. Okay, not saying that tempo work, there's no place for it. Absolutely there is. It's great for technique as well, not only hypertrophy, okay? So we can utilize tempo work for other things as well. But when it comes to hypertrophy and strength is I'm thinking about that when I'm squatting, okay? I'm trying to utilize the squat to get strong, but my accessory movements, okay, things like, for example, a hamstring curl, leg extension, a leg press, we're going to start thinking about, okay, time under tension. How can we get more muscle? Because, again, more muscle means more potential to move more weight. So we're going to slow it down. We're going to create a slower centric portion of the lift, meaning, let's say we're talking about a hamstring curl. I'm actually going to get my lovely camera lady here to give you a demonstration. So, jump on, my lady. Now, the focus here, we're talking about time under tension, okay? So I want you to focus on a really slow eccentric and also a full range of motion, okay? So there's the full stretch position. So she's going to curl it up. She's going to hold for a second. Now she's going to go really slow on the way down. This is the eccentric portion. Okay, this is where, again, hypertrophy is going to be found in the full range of motion, but also in creating time under tension. This is extremely difficult to do, right? To control the weight down nice and slow. And if hypertrophy is your focus, then you should be lowering the weight faster than you're lifting it. Thank you, darling. That is a great tutorial. You can come back now. When it comes to time under tension, that's kind of the difference, right? You need to think about, again, why are we doing the movement? Is it for strength? Is it for size? If it's for size, then yes, prioritize a slow eccentric. Prioritize a greater range of motion. Okay? We can even use that example for the range of motion on the squat as well. Although in powerlifting we have to achieve, a below parallel squat, if we really wanted to maximize hypertrophy, we would sink that squat as low as we can possibly go. Okay, but with that as well comes greater risk of injury, which is why sometimes if we're going to be focusing on hypertrophy only, that's your main focus, you may be better off doing other exercises that are going to be lower risk but higher return. That's just smart training. It's about being efficient. But again, it always depends on your goals. For me personally, it's about getting bigger and stronger. So I like to utilize both of these things. But that covers time under tension. Again, hope you're learning something so far. Make sure you've liked this video, drop a comment, subscribe, but also hit the notification button so you're notified when I post videos. Let's go. And now we're going to talk about volume and intensity and how that can affect your training. Now, when it comes to muscle growth, there's a few different schools of thought here, right? It's a little bit debatable, and in a lot of ways, there probably isn't a right or wrong answer, but there's going to be things that will work for you and things that won't work as well. So, a couple of the more popular schools of thought is you've got the people that absolutely flog volume, okay? They go hard, they do a lot, they do so much until they can do no more, but they cause absolute destruction to the muscle tissue, which, yes, does definitely bring upon hypertrophy, okay? Now, there's pros and cons. Now, the cons to that being, when you beat yourself up so much, recovery is a lot more difficult, okay? So you could potentially be spending more time between sessions, which is something I'm going to cover a little later in the video, which isn't ideal, okay? But you can definitely achieve hypertrophy through high amounts of volume, because to achieve hypertrophy, yes, we do need to be doing a certain amount of volume to a degree, okay? Now, the other school of thought is there's the system of doing much lower volume but extremely high intensity. Now, that intensity meaning you are pushing to absolute failure, okay? You're not doing so many reps or sets perhaps. You may only do 1 to 2 sets, but you are taking those sets until and beyond failure, causing maximum damage to the muscles in a shorter period of time. Now, again, there's pros and cons to this. The pro to that versus, let's say, flogging volume would probably be that you will recover faster. Okay, you will recover faster, and you're still going to be achieving some great hypertrophy. Now, what is better? Again, there's a lot of debate on this, and people are going to have their own opinions. Now, my opinion would be that I think that doing lower volume and higher intensity is smarter and probably better, maybe better. It's smarter, it's more efficient. I think that it's probably better for longevity. Now, I also see the pros to flogging volume, because some people train for other reasons as well. Sometimes we like to train really hard because it's a mental health release. It's good for our heads, and it's good for our health to train and to be active. Okay, but in saying that, I just think that if I had to pick between those two training systems, I think for longevity and for overall progress, that doing the least amount you can do for maximum return is the way to go. I think that's not really debatable. I think that in the grand scheme of things, if you want to be successful, you're best off doing the absolute smallest amount of possible for the maximum return, because the moment you start doing more, if that return starts to drop, it's not really any longer worth it, is it? Because the goal ultimately is success, okay? So just because something may feel good, as they say, doesn't mean it's good for you. So it depends on you, and it depends on what you want. But there's definitely a few different schools of thought there. Now, when it comes to the comparison for hypertrophy and strength training, volume, we have to think about it a little differently, because there's different sorts of fatigue that we can acquire with sorts of volume and intensity. Now, when it comes to powerlifting, we are looking at different sorts of fatigue. Now, typically with strength training, when we're trying to move maximal load, we're going to be seeing a lot more central nervous system fatigue, which may not be as obvious or apparent to some people, okay? It may not be something you can feel like a sore muscle from, from doing a lot of volume. It's going to present itself with tiredness and fatigue in other areas, okay? So the amount of volume that we're doing with our strength training, we need to think about keeping that perhaps a little bit lower, especially with the heavier work that we're doing, right? Again, training styles are different. So we can't expect, a power lifter who's typically lifting more weight to be doing the same amount of volume, overall volume, as a bodybuilder who's doing more reps and more sets with a lighter weight. Okay, so there's different sorts of volumes for different sorts of goals. Okay, now that's going to be very dependent on your goal, as I always say. So it's very important that when you program for yourself, when you're doing your training plan, that you know exactly what you're programming for, exactly what you're planning for, and what you're trying to achieve. So you can make sure that that program is designed specifically to help you achieve that. Otherwise, what are you doing? You know what I mean? You don't really know what you're doing, kind of floating in between things, and it's very easy to obviously hit plateaus and to stall and things like that. So, with that in mind, my books are open for my personalized online coaching. So, if you're looking to take your training to the next level, perhaps you've struggled to achieve those things you've been really working towards. Perhaps you've hit some roadblocks, but now is the time, gang. We're towards the end of the fucking year, right? Another year almost gone. If you're ready to step up and to get to work and to actually achieve these things, send me an email at thecultstrength@gmail.com and I will get in touch with you. We have one more to go. Hope you're enjoying it. Let's go. All right, guys, now we're going to talk about recovery, and this kind of ties in to the last one, but before we do get onto that, I wanted to just mention that when it comes to training to failure, it wouldn't be typically ideal, for a powerlifter to train to failure with a squat or a deadlift or a bench press, okay? Because when we train to absolute failure with those movements, it can result in a much higher chance of injury. So I would steer clear of that. We typically like to stop just before failure. I mean, we do fail sometimes, but we don't want it to be a regular thing or something that we're aiming for. That wouldn't be ideal. Now, with recovery, this is really important when it comes to training, because let's say you're doing all these other things right. You've got, your range of motion down pat, time under tension, sweet, your volume intensity, cool beans, man. But let's say your recovery sucks. That could really be stunting your growth. That could really be stopping you from progressing. And unfortunately, some people, when they're not progressing, that mentality of let's just do more then isn't going to help you. We need to recover to grow. Okay, so we're going to talk about those couple of methods that we spoke about and how recovery relates to that. So when we talk about the low volume, high intensity, I think that is a great method simply because we can recover faster from doing less volume. Okay, even though we're working really hard beyond failure, if we're doing just 2 sets, let's say we do 1 set to an 8 out of 10 difficulty and the second set is to a 10, right? We've only done 2 sets of volume. It's a very limited amount of volume. Now, if you take the thought process of let's just flog the volume and you do 5 sets of 15, okay, you've now done bloody 75 repetitions. That's going to be a lot harder to recover from, and you're going to need more days in between sessions to recover. Okay, now if you start training that body part before you've recovered, you're not going to allow optimal growth, okay, and it's going to affect your gains for the next session, etc. So that's why it's really important to understand that if you're flogging volume, you need to understand your frequency of how often you train things perhaps isn't going to be as high as someone who is doing lower total volume, but still working to be on failure. Okay, so depending on what you like to do, maybe you just love to flog the volume and that's fine. You can still get hypertrophy from doing that. Is it absolutely optimal? Maybe not. Okay, but you can still get bigger, you can still get better. I do see the benefits to it, but at least understand you're going to have to spend more time between sessions and more focus on recovery. Okay, now if you're training, let's say, higher intensity, less volume, well, you probably need to understand that if you want to maximize your gains, you're going to have a little bit more frequency. So maybe you're going to have to train those body parts a little bit more frequently than you currently are to maximize your gains, to be optimal. Okay, you may be getting great gains right now, but if you were training optimally, would it be better? Probably. Probably, right? And recovery obviously is more than just time between sessions. It comes down to sleep, comes down to nutrition, comes down to a whole lot of things, right? But if you think about it in general, in time between sessions and when you should be training, how often you should be training, it's really important to know that if you're doing a lot of work, you do need to take more time. because doing, more work too soon isn't going to help your cause. It's just not. And that's, coming from me. I have, over 10 years of coaching experience. I have over 10 years of competing experience at a very high level, not to mention other sports as well, coaching and competing. So I've been in it for a while. I love to teach, I like to educate, and I want to help you guys get bigger and stronger. So I really hope you enjoyed that. Hope you got something out of it. Until next time, I think you know what to do. Go to my website, buy a program. They're on sale. It's Wonderful Wednesday, 25% off all programs, all merch, and of course, go to the fucking gym, baby. Let's go.